My name is Emmanuel Paraskakis, and I work for a company called APIdays.io. And Apiary is pretty much an API design and collaboration platform. It's an online platform, a SaaS platform, and we have more than 130,000 users or API designers on there designing, more than 174,000 APIs, and a bunch of consumers looking at the documentation generated from that. But prior to that, like Mehdi said, I was in the insurance industry, and I've been in the insurance industry for about 25 years. In the beginning in the industry, but then moving on to technology for insurance. And I've spent I guess the last 7 years, I've spent it in the catastrophe modeling firms, building APIs for those firms, so building APIs for really big data, transferring big data back and forth, and taking care of big job runs and so on. So what I'm going to talk about today is about managing risk in API projects. So I'm going to talk about a few of the mistakes we made and how we got to correct them and how we got to manage risk. So hopefully you guys can take that away and have successful API projects. So as we know, there's incredible demand for APIs. We heard that from all of the speakers here. We heard that from the speaker from Accenture, Michael. And the reason for this is that we're trying to build mobile apps, we're trying to partner with people. Regulation is driving us building new APIs. And that's only accelerating. So we absolutely know this, and we hear that every day. For example, I remember the CEO of the company I was at basically mentioning our API as a product in his keynote speech in our user conference in front of hundreds and hundreds of people. So I'm sitting there in the back, and it's like, no pressure. You have to execute on that. And also my colleague Matt Reinbold here sent me a quote yesterday about the CEO of Capital One Bank talking about their API product and their API strategy in their earnings call. So this is becoming a very high visibility topic. So you got the demand going on. And also, the mainstream business press is getting in on this. We've got, Harvard Business Review is writing an article on, why corporate alliances, don't matter anymore because of APIs. And you can go read that article. So everybody's pressuring us to do more and more and more API projects. And I think the problem here is going to be, as we do more and more of these projects, we might have to, wonder about the success of those projects. So what could possibly go wrong here? Winter is coming, right? Brace yourselves. So the big problem here, I think, is going to be project execution risk. So API projects, like any other IT project, have some risk. We know about the bibliography about project failures, IT project failures. It's been documented. But I think API projects are, have an even greater amount of risk. So I would say, double or triple the risk. And the reason I think for this is that you've got two or more counterparties. So a normal IT project is going to be something that happens within your company, within, for example, an insurance company. You will have the IT department building a back end, building a front end, and all the people are more or less talking amongst themselves. If you're building an API, by definition, it's going to be built for some external consumer. Maybe they're, someone in the same company in a different department, in a different country, or maybe you're bringing in some external consultancy to build a mobile app, for example, on top of your API, or even maybe you're building a public API and you just don't know who is going to use that. So the risk multiplies for API projects. And, I'm going to talk a little bit about the things I've seen, the problems that I've seen. So problem number one, projects taking too long. And as I said before, this is, even more so for API projects. So I've had examples of, companies trying to build out an API first project. not talking to their consumers, going back, redoing it again, and it just took too long, cost too long. It impacted the company's financial bottom line because it cost too much. But it also introduced some market risk. You had clients being dissatisfied, saying, when are we going to get our hands on this new product? And it just took too long, and it was a problem. So next thing you'll see out there, and I've seen out there, is that you have projects that don't meet consumer needs. We take a big bang approach. We have a back end, we have a bunch of data. Here's our policy data. We're going to expose that, and big bang approach. Turns out it's not going to meet people's needs. For a good example of that I had is, let's expose everything in a crowd fashion. Give the app builders a chance to have everything in their application. Well, guess what? You tried to load a page from the app. It made like 40 to 100 API calls. The app was slow. Disaster. So, didn't meet the consumer needs. Another case is where the API is too difficult to understand. Often we just expose what we have in our backend, maybe in our database. And because we have that context, we understand what all those fields mean, all that naming means. We just think that this is going to be okay with API consumers. Well, guess what? API consumers are coming in from the outside. We might say contract in our internal database. Maybe the consumers are coming from an industry where they call contracts policies or treaties, and that causes confusion. Next thing up is API documents not being accurate. So we created an API, and kind of the documentation went off on a different track. So we had tech writers. They started writing, what the API documentation is going to look like, and in the back end, the developers were still going on a different track. So the API was similar to what the documentation was describing, but a little different. And that probably is worse than having it be completely dissimilar. So that was a big source of confusion and a big source of dissatisfaction. And of course, the other thing is you can very easily introduce some security vulnerabilities there, either through wrong use of authentication, wrong use of encryption algorithms. Stevie, made a good example of that yesterday. So that's something else to watch out for. And kind of going to the worst case scenarios here, I've seen partnerships fail, where a fintech company might say, or a bank might say, we lined up some partners and we announced it. The CEO is out there announcing it. We're going to partner up with these people, and the way we're going to partner is we're going to exchange data, and that's going to be in an API. You screw up that API project, then probably the partnership is going to go south. That's going to have implications. It's going to be in the press. That partner is not going to want to work with you. And kind of the knock-on effect of that, and probably even more important, is you might miss some interesting market opportunities. So you don't want to be the guy that ends up in that area where you're responsible for an API project, it becomes a failed project, and then it results on all these financial and otherwise bad situations for the insurance company or the bank to be in. So what can we do? Well, there's process changes we can do. And this is, again, what I've observed and how we kind of went back and fixed the problem. So the first thing, and I think it really echoes what Arnaud was saying yesterday, what Ronnie was saying today, is you got to treat your API as a product. It's no longer a byproduct of some development process and something that just happens out there. You got to treat it as a product. And that means you got to have design around it. You probably have to have a product manager or somebody who owns that. And again, when you hear your CEO come out in an important talk and say, hey, our strategy is based around APIs and our API is going to be a product, you better treat that as a product. And I come from product management. The way to do things right is to involve your stakeholders. Design the products, prototype it, show it to people, see what they think, and get the feedback loop going, and iterate around that. And we heard that. I mean, I heard that a lot in the talks yesterday and today. Mike Kelly talked about that. We keep hearing that. So iterate until your consumers or potential consumers are happy. And if it's a public API and you don't know who the consumers are, go and choose some people out there, or go and find some partners, make it a semi-private API in the beginning until you get it right and you can put it out there. So the next thing is going to be, you're going to have to manage the life cycle and the change. As you build those iterations and as the market changes around you, or you bring in new partners, you're going to have to change that API. And there's a lot of discussion going on about how you technically do that, but I'm more interested in the process here. So you're going to have many APIs out there at the same time in different stages of their life cycle. And you're going to have people wanting to come in and say, this is not right with your API. We want to suggest some changes. So you need to be able to do that. And at the end of the day, you need to be able to move fast and not break things. People say, move fast and break things. We're not into that, I think, in the fintech industry. So you're going to need ways to test and validate and perhaps even do some test-driven development where you have your design and you want to make sure your implementation matches the design. Or you want to build in tests in your continuous integration to make sure any changes you make are not going to break your API. So one thing we've also heard the past day or so is this design-first approach. So, API is now a product. We need to design it. And as you create more APIs, especially in large companies such as in banking and insurance, you're going to have many people designing APIs. And all these people might be in different time zones, different departments, different business units. Pretty soon, you're going to want some kind of style guide to make sure those APIs are consistent. Make sure they match your industry standards. Make sure they match the lingo of the industry. And they come across as one product line and not like completely inconsistent. So consistency is going to be very, very important. I want to talk a little bit about API design and give a little bit of history. So we've seen, pretty much four stages of API design. And the first stage is, the older stage where the API is a byproduct of building your application. You built your application, somebody said, we want to connect to the data, we want to get some data, and you're like, okay, well, here's some way to connect. And you don't worry about developer experience so much. So I remember in one of the previous companies I was working at, we had this VP, he came up and he said, well, you know what does it matter if it's a good API? What does it matter about developer experience? It's just a bunch of developers. It's not going to matter. That guy left the company pretty soon. The next stage is where you're building out your API. You're kind of more conscious about building out the API, and you generate the documentation out of your API. So whatever you did in the implementation, you kind of generate some documentation so you can have people actually understand what the API is saying. And there you don't have that much input in the design. It's whatever it turns out to be. But you have faithful documentation coming out of that. And again, I remember an example of a developer lead coming to me and saying, you know what, don't worry about that. The API is going to take care of itself, and it's going to be fine. That guy, left the company pretty soon. So the next stage is going to be where you're doing design first. We're hearing about that a lot. It's a great thing. Actually, APIdays, the company I work for, came up with that term as I understand it. And it's a great approach. It's a really good approach because you're thinking about the product, you're thinking about what it's going to do, who's going to consume it, and you're really, doing things right. And this is where I think most companies are getting to. It's becoming an accepted practice, so that's great. And I guess the fourth stage that we see, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it just now, is going to be how do you enforce or encourage that consistency across APIs. So you're doing design first, you're designing it, but you might have people in two different sections of the company doing two different, completely opposite designs. So how do you make those designs come out and those APIs come out to look as if they're coming from the same company? So at APIRE, we do have tooling for all of that. We do have tooling to iterate around design and collaborate on design, and it's pretty much all we do. So we only do that. We use a format called API Blueprint. It's a spec format. It looks something like this. You can go in and describe your API in that. It's a SaaS platform, so you go online, you log in, you don't have to do any setup, and you can invite all your collaborators to come and collaborate with you. So there's an editor that you can type in your spec. It checks whether your spec is correct. It generates documentation, it generates a mock server, and you can inspect traffic. And all of that is so you can share it with folks and discuss about what the design is going to be. And this just enables that rapid iteration that other speakers were talking about. You don't need to go and build a prototype. It kind of builds it for you. I'm going to show you a quick example right here. So this is what the app looks like. I can basically I can get a URL out of my design, and I hit that URL. It's an actual API. You can go plug that into your mobile app. You can give that URL to people, and they can code against it. But really quickly, if you wanted to say, that URL, it shouldn't be question, it should be questions. I'm going to save here, and I'm going to show you what these mean a little bit later. But if I go back to my URL here, you know what? This is probably going to be a 404 here. My mock server changed right away, so if I do questions, this is the right thing. So you're able to very, very quickly change your design and show it to people. You can share that URL, and people can come on this platform and actually type into the design and change things and show you what they mean. So that's one thing. That means that you can kind of like work on your design, and instead of it taking a long, long time to get to the clients and come back to you with suggestions, and you come back to them, and maybe that takes 2 sprint iterations, maybe call it a month or so, you can actually all work on the same design right there, and you can go back and forth really, really quickly. So we think this is a great way to de-risk your API project, because you're getting in the customer feedback or the user feedback, and you're iterating around the design really, really quickly. Next thing I want to talk about really quickly, I won't demo it right now, but you can talk to me afterwards. It's basically building tests around your API. And you can sit there and build tests, and I used to do that. It's going to take a while to get those tests correct, and you're also going to have to write tests about how the app and the API behaves. So the last thing you want to do is write tests to see if your implementation meets the spec. So at API, we do have a tool, we call it Dread, and basically it's a very simple tool. It's a command line tool. What it does is it takes in the spec as one input, and the URL for a live endpoint as another input, and it tells you whether it passes or fails. So you can sit there and either do test-driven development. You can say, well, I'm going to work on my implementation and my code until I see green and until I meet the spec, or you can use that same tool in your continuous integration and make sure any change that happens, on purpose or inadvertently, ends up in an implementation that meets your spec. So I think that's another very useful tool for de-risking your implementation. And then we also have tools about integrating with GitHub, managing change. We talked about, and other speakers talked about having a style guide that enforces, standards across the board. So you can make changes, but keep consistency. And real quick, I'm going to show one last demo and then move it on to Q&A. So right here, I've got an API spec. It's the same thing we were looking at before. And what it's telling me here is that there's a couple of semantic issues. First of all, and you guys, some of you guys might appreciate that it's saying, well, you know what, line 14 contains spelling that's Americanized. It's not British English. So perhaps, for example, as a British company, you want to standardize on your spelling of the terms that are in the API. It's what developers see. So if I go in here and, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, live demos. So what that's going to do is it's going to tell me, yes, that passed a rule that I have, and it's okay, and that's still good. So it's saying there's only one issue. So if I go, and look at that, I've had some internet connectivity problems here, so it's not really helping me. So if I go and change this, it's saying, well, your term should be camel cased, and if I try to save that, it's going to also tell me that everything is okay. So you got your people doing the API design. They can use this editor, and they can kind of stick to the rules that we have. So it's not working for me. So there you go, live demos. You also have a dashboard that you can go in and look at what all the APIs look like. Do they comply, and are they consistent with the styling rules that you have? And you have a way to put together your rules. So you can say, I have a rule about camel casing, I have a rule about date formats, and so on. So this is it about the API design lifecycle. You design, you prototype, iterate very quickly, you implement, and then you test your documentation, and then you can deliver your code, and then you keep that feedback loop going. So talked about risk mitigation. You need to meet this huge demand that's there. You need to have fast cycles so you can meet your customers or your users' needs. Have happy users, have happy partners, so more people are going to want to come in and work with you. Be able to change very quickly. Think, how developers use GitHub or other version control tools today. And you need really to seize market opportunities in the face of rapid change. So iterate very quickly around that. So what you can do, check out APIdays.io. It's free to try. You can go online right now and check it out. You can come talk to me. I'm a product guy, so I'd love to hear about the problems that you're having and how you want to solve them. And also the third thing, we got some T-shirts and stickers over there. Very few of those. Welcome to grab those after the talks are done. So that's it for me. Thank you very much. And yeah, any questions?
Yeah, we have time for some questions.
No?
Yeah, one here.
Hi, thank you, Emmanuel. What you said remind me a lot of things I've seen too. I have a question about the documentation. So what you describe is the documentation of the API, the interface of the information system. Have you seen some systems to document the relations between the API and what runs behind?
Right. So I think the question is there a way to look at an implementation as a black box and derive documentation from it? Is that your question?
The idea is to have a good vision of where your API is plugged. To see, okay, I have a endpoint, so get/accounts, and I'd like to know maybe at design time to say, okay, this endpoint will trigger this component, this microservice, this web service, this MQ message for those who work with all things, this kind of thing.
No, I haven't seen something as advanced, although I think you make a good point. With microservices, instead of us having a big API surface, I think we're going to want a way to describe the capabilities of each service. It's one thing when you have one service that serves everything, and we can point to a documentation, but it's another thing to have these, hundreds potentially of microservices, each in its own kind of state or version. I think there you're going to need some way to expose that API description or API specification and give some machine or some human a way to understand the capabilities of the API. And even more so when you start considering hypermedia, when you're going to want to look at what transitions, what capabilities, what semantics are there for an API. I hope I answered your question.
So we made a report on that we will release and we will send to every attendee about like fintech industry's state of the API market. I have one question. So some people in this report, the report will be anonymized, so no institution will be named, and this is why they accepted to these long interviews. But some people were saying that, oh, we were using a Word document to describe APIs. Some say that like it was really not the cool developer way to do stuff. Like sometimes when you say GitHub to some enterprise, they say, what? Like it's not their culture. And you have some institutional financial institutions that are a customer of API. What they had before coming on API?
So yeah, absolutely. So it's very much there. What you say. First of all, they had nothing. First of all, it's like an API that's undocumented. Then somebody is saying, well, I'm going to sit there and try to figure out what the API does, hit it with some testing tool, figure out what it does, and document it out of band, separately. So that can get out of sync. And then tooling and thought processes evolve, and you get into this hopefully thought process where you're designing first, and everything flows from the design. And everything hopefully is saved along in version control and in GitHub. Like you said, and I know you say that big corporations use maybe older tooling, but we see that changing a lot. So, for example, it used to be that GitHub would only be used by small-time developers or startups, and so on. Well, GitHub now has GitHub for Enterprise, and a lot of customers are asking us, hey, can we hook into GitHub for Enterprise or Stash, Atlassian Stash, and we do that for them. So. There's a lot of movement from even the largest corporations to move towards more tools that used to be part of the startup environment. Definitely seeing that.
Okay. So it's about culture, right? Living in the API culture in the company.
I think that the culture is changing. And I think the culture changes also come from who is going to be the consumer of our API. It's people that are out there that are used to writing apps. Maybe they're writing apps against Facebook, Flickr, Instagram, whatever. They expect the same kind of thing from even the largest corporation. So the expectation is there, and they're causing that culture change, I think, even inside the corporation.
Okay. Thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.